Hi there, it's Vanessa. I'm here today to tell you what my favorite books were in 2024. I also thought it would be fun. I've seen a lot of videos that have talked about their favorite books in terms of superlatives, and I thought that would be a good way to kind of pitch certain books to you to see if they might be something that you would be interested in. We're going to talk first about nonfiction because I know a lot of you come to my channel for nonfiction. Honestly, I had a really hard year when it comes to fiction in particular, but my nonfiction was pretty stellar, and I think I just know the kinds of stories that I gravitate towards and that I'm interested in. I'm very good at picking nonfiction for myself, I feel like. So for that reason, there's way more nonfiction to talk about. So I want to talk first about my honorable mentions, then we'll talk about like the best, and then we'll talk about my favorite, so the top. Here are my honorable mentions. A book that I feel is very misunderstood, the superlative of being most misunderstood, is American Breakdown. I think everybody has varied opinions on it. This book talks about chronic fatigue syndrome that the author has been dealing with for decades, and what she believes have helped her situation versus like what hasn't helped her situation. Misunderstood. If you read those reviews, I ended up giving it 4 stars, but some people have a lot of thoughts about this author and what she believes about her own condition. Another one of my honorable mentions is One in a Millennial. This is for all my millennial girlies. I think that you would enjoy this book, and the superlative that I'm giving to it is the most self-compassionate. When I started reading this book, I didn't have many high hopes for it. Is it just going to be different pop culture events that millennials remember? And also the fact that it comes from a podcast originally. So is it like a rehashing of what the podcast is? It became more memoir-esque in the way that she looked at more systemic issues that affect women, millennial women, body image and like infertility and dating from her perspective, obviously as a white millennial woman. I really enjoyed how she came across. I thought that it was a vulnerable book and very compassionate towards herself. Another one of my honorable mentions is the most fangirly book. It's Heartbreak is the National Anthem, and this is by Rob Sheffield. It's a book all about Taylor Swift. I thought that this book was going to be more like a history of her career and how it started, more chronological. And it's not that. It also, I feel, doesn't really fit the like subtitle of it as well either. It's not really a book that is a thesis, like positing a thesis and then arguing for that thesis. I think it's honestly just a book about memories that the author has about learning about Taylor Swift's music and all of the deep dives and information that he knows. So if you're a Taylor Swift fan, if you were overtaken by the Eras Tour, or if you're interested in learning more, I think that it was fun, it was lighthearted, it was humorous, but it's definitely circular. Another one of my honorable mentions is Drive. This is, I give it the superlative of being the most fly under the radar book. I've never heard anybody talk about this book, and I think the only reason that I found out about it is I saw it on my library's Libby app, like things that were coming out soon. It just looked interesting. The cover of it looked interesting, and I always like learning about corporations and their business practices and how it affects real people and their lives. So Drive is a book where the author is relating his experiences driving for Uber and Lyft, trying to make ends meet in Florida. He is separated and in the process of divorcing his wife and has a very young child, and is not able to make ends meet with child support with his full-time job as a state worker in Florida. So he ends up doing Uber and Lyft on the side to make extra cash. And it's really about the nice experiences that he had with other humans who use Uber and Lyft. So there are like heartwarming and interesting stories. You get to learn, I don't know, like you're kind of like a fly on the wall for these people's lives and what they're going through. But it's also about like really horrible things that he experienced as a driver, how hard it is to be part of the gig economy and to like drive around all night. If you like learning about, you know, everyday Americans and how they're trying to make ends meet, I think you would find this interesting. He has lots of interesting stories to tell. My last honorable mention is America for Americans. This book, I would say, is the most academic and dense in a good way. I mean, those adjectives might not make you want to pick it up, calling it academic and dense, but I mean that in the best way possible, in the sense that this is a very respectable and commendable book, something that I think is something that we need published and something that we need to learn about. It's a book that perhaps maybe you don't have to read cover to cover, but it's really interesting the way that the researcher and academic puts this all together. So America for Americans is a book that looks into immigration and xenophobia in America from the beginning of the founding of America, so looking back into like the 16 to 1700s, and like the big change that happened with the Chinese Exclusion Act. That's, I think, like the main point of this book, is like that started everything that we know about immigration today. And basically, like, the argument that she has is that we've always been antagonistic towards immigrants in this country, even from the 1700s. I think she does a very good job at making that the case, making that something that I agree to as well. Basically, every group that is unwanted ends up becoming a part of the tapestry of American life, but there is, and still is for many groups in society, kind of like a contentious aspect between them and being a part of America. All right, so now we're climbing up to the best, right? Not my favorite, but the best. I have The Quiet Damage, and this is a book that I was really looking forward to. I read it over the summer, fall, I believe. I would say that this book gets the superlative of being the most empathetic book that I read, the most empathetic nonfiction book that I read. It is a book that looks into different families who have gone through situations having to do with conspiracy theories and falling into QAnon beliefs online. I don't think that the author lets people off for believing these things or doing horrible things online, but I think she's empathetic in the sense of like what is happening in an individual's life that leads them to fall into these fears online, what kinds of things are going on with their jobs or with their relationships, or even about their own beliefs about themselves, like what is going on internally. It's a really interesting look at what befalls or what happens to the family members around them. I think that's more the point of the book, is not looking at the people who are in these fears, but looking at how the family is reacting and how the family is trying to come to terms with the fact that there's multiple dimensions to someone that they felt like they knew that they no longer feel like they know, someone as close as like their mother or their husband, and what they do as a result of that. I thought that this book had good ideas about what to do in those situations. I think it made good points about what it is we need to do as a government, as a country, systematically, to make sure that everybody, all of our citizens, feel taken care of. Do I think it's going to happen? No. But I like learning about different families and what they're going through as well when it comes to these topics, and so I enjoyed reading this book. A book that was the most vulnerable celebrity memoir of the year, Tell Me Everything. Tell Me Everything is the memoir by Minka Kelly, who is a actress that I followed for many, many years. She's most famously for me in Friday Night Lights, but she's been in other things that I've also watched. She's also in Parenthood, which I also really enjoyed. So I had some background into her, and I really like the way that she acts. Honestly, did not know anything about her background or her life, and I think this is a great book for anybody that's like tired of hearing about Nepo babies and wants to learn about someone who is truly like found their career through their grit, tenacity, through their talent, and through the connections that they made on their own. It's a very hard book because, by the way I'm describing it, she had a really tough childhood. Her and her mother really bounced around. They were homeless often. She had really troubling, toxic relationships with boys and men, sometimes with very horrible age gaps. And she had difficult ways of seeing her sexuality as well, and like her body too. She danced for a couple years too, and then kind of like how she ended up becoming an actress. I really felt for her. I think she's someone that has probably gone to a lot of therapy and has really thought about all of the things that have gone on in her life, what she's learned through all of the things that she's gone through. She seems like someone who's really focused on friendships through like the relationships that she had. I think she had a good head on her shoulders at the end of the day to learn about herself and to go through tough things in life. The next book on my list is Liliana's Invincible Summer, and I would call this book the most cathartic. I think about it tenderly because I feel like the author cared a lot about the subject matter, obviously, and took a lot of self-reflection for her to be able to write this book about her sister, who died in Mexico through an act of femicide, which is believed but has never been proven. Her ex-boyfriend, they believe, did this to her, never served any time. It's really about what women go through when it comes to domestic abuse, what family members surrounding them know and don't know about certain situations. It's just a way for the author to put herself in her shoes of her sister, to think about her life not just in the terms of her romantic relationships, you know, just wistfully thinking about like the possibilities and the hopes that we all have as young women, and how that can be taken away from you because there are many men in this world who don't know how to reflect to themselves or how to think about their feelings, and deal with their own problems and how that is a life cut short and how sad that is for her family. So yeah, very cathartic. I could tell like it was a way to like put pen to paper and to feel like you memorialized your sister in a way that does her justice. And last but not least, in my the best ranking, I have the superlative for the most complete essay collection, which is actually a great superlative because having an essay collection where all the essays are good, that they all land, is very difficult. This book of essays is They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us. This is a collection of essays that looks primarily into pop culture and music and how pop culture and music affects the author's upbringing growing up in Ohio, kind of the ways that he felt about a lot of grief that he suffered because of many friends that passed away. It's about friendship, I think, and about self-reflection, looking into your own self and your identity. There's 2 essays about Carly Rae Jepsen in this collection, which go off. He also talks about like Migos, he talks about Fall Out Boy, he talks about Prince, and the way that he connects it to his own internal things that he's thinking about. I think we're really, really well done. Okay, so now we've made it to the best of the best. Are you ready? In my number 3 spot is the book that I most reference and bring up. And I think that this is something that makes a book climb up in my rankings. Even if I didn't give it a full 5 stars, if I keep thinking about it and if I keep like having random conversations in real life and I'm like, hold on, this reminds me of this book, I think that that is a great quality for a book to have, especially a nonfiction book. My number 3 spot goes to Doppelganger. This book has been beloved. The way that it's been described definitely had me like, I need to read it in 2024, and I'm really, really glad I did. This book pairs well with The Quiet Damage, which I talked about earlier. The way that this book is framed is through the eyes of Naomi Klein, who's the author, and how often that she is confused with Naomi Wolf, who used to be very much like a feminist author and thinker that in the past 5 to 10 years has really switched the way that she talks about issues like that online and has become a conspiracy theorist and pusher of conspiracy theories. So she has a lot of interesting ways to talk about like that pipeline of going from like very liberal ideas to like going far right. And I think her main thought and her main like argument is that this is just another aspect of living in a capitalist society and also in an individualistic society where we are so self-centered, we only think about ourselves, and that yes, it's emotionally taxing to live around these people, but they're not going anywhere. They're also just as tired about the capitalist system that we live in as we are. Kind of sobering and kind of sad, but really something that I've kept thinking about. In my number 2 spot, and also in my number 1 spot, there are books about pop culture that actually were lighter than many of the other things that I've talked about today. I felt safe reading these books in such a hard year. My number 2 spot is for Disney High, which I think is the most nostalgic book out of all my nonfiction books here. In particular, if you're like of my age range and you grew up with the Disney Channel or you grew up with Disney Channel original movies, what the kids who were actors in that time were facing in the culture, what kinds of things the Disney Corporation was kind of imposing on these kids because of said culture. I think it was just really, really fascinating to think of the things that I grew up on, the girls and the actresses and the singers I grew up like emulating or looking up to. Hilary Duff and the Lizzie McGuire show and movie. Learning so much more about Raven and what she went through. Hannah Montana and Miley Cyrus, who also was kind of like, I was later in life for that point, but I still watched and enjoyed. Learning about the Jonas Brothers and like purity culture, like it just took me back to being that age that they were when I was, you know, in like, I don't know, 2005 to 2010, which doesn't feel that long ago, but yeah, I remember the culture then and it was quite different. It's a big stark contrast to what it is now. My favorite nonfiction book of the year is Cue the Sun by Emily Nussbaum. I think that this book gets the superlative of being the most fun nonfiction book that I read. It's a book that does talk about heavy topics in the sense of like what was permissible on TV, and also there's a chapter about you-know-who, the reality TV star turned president, which I could maybe have done without. But everything in this like massive tome of like 450 pages was so engaging, so captivating. I really just wanted to keep listening to the audiobook, and I think I finished this book in just a few days. It's just fascinating, interesting to look at what reality television was like in the 80s and 90s and 2000s and what it is now. The author was able to find all these people to interview who were at the cutting edge of this like new way of making television that honestly, like, reality TV has seeped into so much of our culture now. It's like such an ingrained part of our entertainment system that it feels kind of weird to think about it being in such infancy. The Real World, there's a whole chapter on Survivor that's so fascinating as someone who loves Survivor. It talks about a lot of reality shows that I have watched, but also gives you the context and the background about where it all started too, and like where different people got ideas from and who the players were, who got signed on board, and what became popular, and what kinds of things were like copycats versus like what new original reality television programming they were able to create. If you like any of those kinds of topics, pop culture, reality TV, I think you would honestly really enjoy this book, and the audiobook is also really, really great. Let's talk really quickly about my fiction books. I don't have that many to talk about. I honestly feel comfortable talking about 3 books. And particularly, I didn't read very good adult fiction. And that's a big goal that I have for myself in 2025. And I've already started this January, like really reading more adult fiction because I want to find my niche, my thing, in the way that I know how to pick my nonfiction. I want to be that way about adult fiction, and I don't feel that way about my adult fiction. But let's talk about my favorite adult fiction book, which I read really towards the tail end of the year. The only adult fiction book that got 5 stars for me, and the most overly dramatic main character who I just like love, and I think I want to reread this book as soon as possible, and that is Catalina. This is a book that I feel, if you read some of the reviews, they are very divided, and I can understand why. The tone of the humor I don't think will land for everybody. It's very like dry and self-deprecating and like pulls at threads and ideas about being an immigrant in this country, like feeling like an American but also feeling like you're not an American, being kind of like seen as like the ticket for your family, being able to go to like a really fancy college all paid for, and how people who are well connected in this college look at you, like, who are you? She's very like quiet and reserved, but she lands like zingers, and she's just so funny. The way she talks about dictators, Henry Kissinger, boys, and like being in relationships with boys, about her grandparents. A book that I'm holding dear to my heart because I think that it talks a lot about the experience of being that kind of a person. I relate to that experience, but I also just think it's funny, and I think that it's just a very, very intriguing and different kind of book. And I also just love that Carla Cornejo Villavicencio is able to write The Undocumented Americans, an amazing nonfiction book, and then she's like, no, I can do fiction too, and then she writes Catalina. So I'm ready for whatever else she publishes. I'm so ready. I have 2 kids books that I want to talk about that are fiction books. I have Still Sal, which is the best family read aloud in my opinion. If you have a younger reader, I think this is a great one to pick up and to read out loud with them. I'm definitely going to pick up more in this series. I think they're all kind of like standalones, and this one is about Sal and her starting school and how things are changing with a new baby sister sharing a room with her, and it's just so sweet. It is so lovely to read from a family perspective like that is just so kind, letting kids feel their feelings and talking with kids about their feelings, and about changes that are happening in their lives, seeing how they view friends and teachers. It's just lovely. It's a lovely book. And then another book that I really loved that I think is the most heartwarming read of the year for me for kids books was Stella. This was a book that actually a patron talked about to me at the desk, and they really talked it up, and so then I checked it out because of them, and I totally agree with them. If you want to read just like the sweetest dog story, I think you should read this book. I don't know, as a dog lover, if you're a dog lover, you will love this book, of a beagle who made a mistake with the way that she used her scent to detect bombs at an airport, and anthropomorphizing this dog of like what they're going through mentally, but to do that in a way that I think gives topics of discussion for children about those feelings of guilt and overcoming and finding purpose in life. And I read Just Gus after that too, which is the second book, and I also still liked it. I would like to read the rest in the series. Let's talk about the best graphic novels and memoirs of the year. I read quite a few and I liked a lot, but these are the best. We talked about the most heartwarming book, Stella. Now let's talk about the most heart-wrenching book. A book that really I felt panic reading. It's not real people, it's not a memoir, but it's based off of things that actually happened. It hurts that kids go through these kinds of things. And that was Parachute Kids. Another book that I get asked for a lot at the desk at the library, and I was like, I really need to read that because the kids are really enjoying this book. Just seeing what the family is going through, what the three main characters who are kids left in America are going through while their parents are back home trying to get to them and not being able to because of visa reasons, discussions about being undocumented, sacrificing so that your kids could have a better life, and how these kids are really on their own for the most part, how they learned throughout the story to lean on each other as siblings and to lean on their community as well. Heart-wrenching, I think ultimately an uplifting story. The next book I have is It Won't Always Be Like This. This I feel is the most heartfelt book. It just felt very true to the illustrator author's experience. Her mother and father separated, divorced, and her father moves back to live in Egypt while she stays in America, and it details all the summers that she went back to visit. Really, it becomes a story about women's rights and like what women need to feel fulfilled. Looking at the experience of her stepmother, who she really develops a deep relationship with that was lovely to read about. It's less thinking of it won't always be like this, like that it's going to be bad. It's more thinking it won't always be like this, where we're all together, experiencing life together, sharing time together, and that life is changing as she ends up going to college and starting a job, and these like summers, vacations, post-school are not going to happen anymore. I felt emotional reading that book. Number 5 on my list is the book that had, in my opinion, the best friendship dynamics, and that's Look on the Bright Side. The first book in this series was more, I felt like, focused on a theme. It was about period equality and like making sure that there's pads at school. And this book in turn is actually more about relationship dynamics between the 4 friends from the first book. I thought that it did a really good job at having very distinct problems that each girl is going through, feeling like you're doing well in school, relationships, sexuality, and like thinking about what kinds of people you like, and like family dynamics. It's thinking about all those kinds of things, and so it felt like each friend had a distinct voice and tone and story, and also just how they leaned on each other. That's the best part of this book, is how they leaned on each other to help each other out. Another book that I really enjoyed, and which I think is the most realistic graphic novel depiction of what it's like to be a teen tween, is How It All Ends. This book was on a lot of lists. It's really a book about do I fit in? It's a book about I'm awkward. Do people think I'm awkward? It's a book about I have these hobbies and things that I like, and what will people think of that? I think that that's very relatable for kids who are 12, 13. You will find your people in middle school and high school who like the things that you like, and if they think that you're weird because you like those things, then you don't want to be friends with them anyway. I think what this book does the best, though, apart from that, is how humorous it is. This book was laugh out loud funny. I think from the way that the illustrator draws faces and like panels, there are moments where it's like boys are being rambunctious in class with their teachers, and what it's like to be in a hallway and how you feel like squished and like you don't know, it's like a never-ending hallway kind of situation. All those things felt very real and very funny. The next book that I want to talk about is a graphic memoir that gets the superlative of being the most clear-eyed in its message, and that's Worm. This is a book that looks into leaving Cuba during the rise of Fidel Castro and during the Mariel boat lift, moving to Miami and growing up in like Little Havana in that area. Then he ends up moving to New York to go to college and become an illustrator and a graphic designer. He's done a lot of work for magazines, and actually you've probably seen some of his work. Like on Time magazine, he had many covers during the 2016 election. And what I mean by clear-eyed is the way that this book talks about what it was like to live and grow up in a dictatorship, what that meant for the grown-ups in his life, and what kind of power they had and did not have, and how that affected him, not just like emotionally and psychologically, but also like the amount of food that he had to eat and the education that he received, and what it was like to come to America and what that experience taught him about democracy. Very, very clear opinions about Trump and what he views his 2016 presidency as. Again, this book was published before anything that happened in 2024. Number 2 on my list is a book where I believe the hype was right, and that's the talk. This book talks about being black, being raised black as a black male in America. I think this book does a very good job and has really good discussions about race and history and politics. The author illustrator is older, so he's seen a lot in his lifetime. Rodney King and 9/11 and Obama. So it's really fascinating to see kind of his whole life through this book and what he's witnessed. He's a cartoonist in general, and so I think like the way that the panels look is also really captivating and interesting. And last but not least, my favorite graphic memoir of the year is a book that I think is the most relatable, and that is Puzzled. I really love this book. I felt so seen by some of the things that the author and illustrator has gone through in his life when it comes to living with OCD, thinking about like rituals that we have to make ourselves feel safe because of other things going on in our lives. It's good for younger readers too, because this is a kid's graphic memoir that kind of explains like the thought processes and like what fears and insecurities you have about your life that then like unravel in these ways. I think that it's touching. I think that it comes across in a way where you feel for the author and illustrator, and it's also a way for you, if you're struggling or if you're having any of these kinds of thoughts, is a way to understand like who it is that you can talk to as a kid. And I definitely think that that's something that's really important, and I'm sure that this is something that a lot of people also go through. So definitely is a book that you might want to pick up to learn about what people go through having those kinds of thoughts and compulsions of like telling yourself that you need to do this to be safe. So that's all of the books. Hopefully you got some new recommendations from this video. If you did, let me know down below which ones you're kind of looking forward to, or if you already read some of these, also let me know your thoughts down below, and I hope to see you again in my next video. Bye bye.